This is a pain in my foot, but also a story. Have you ever wondered how in just 20 years LEGO sets have become 10 times more expensive? How did they transform from a simple children's toy into a kind of luxury item for collectors? And who's to blame for the decreasing quality? Hi, in this video I will break down the LEGO phenomenon. I will explain in simple terms how the company stepped from the edge of collapse to plastic bricks suddenly costing more than iPhones. We will talk how resellers drove prices of rare LEGO sets to grow faster than Bitcoin, and what role LEGO plays in the children's future. This is Pizza.pepperoni. Let's start. So just like Apple's story didn't begin with iPhones, LEGO's journey started far from plastic bricks. LEGO founder Ole Kirk Christiansen, a Dane, spent 17 years making ordinary wooden toys. Then, in 1947, he came across plastic bricks from a little-known company called Kittycraft. Seeing their potential, Ole decided it was time to act. By 1949, the first LEGO plastic pieces appeared, strikingly similar to Kittycraft ones. By the way, in the 80s, LEGO bought the rights to Kittycraft products to avoid plagiarism accusations. But getting back to the story, it wasn't like copying the bricks immediately let LEGO conquer the market. The first LEGO sets didn't really grab kids' attention, because they looked nothing like they do now. 76 years ago, it was just a box of bricks with no instructions or fancy pictures. So to push the usual wooden and metal toys out of the market, LEGO spent 7 years perfecting and improving its product. Finally, in the 55, they released a simplified version of the modern LEGO City. Thanks to this set, children could follow instructions to build small houses and streets, creating their own worlds. Seeing the success of these sets, LEGO formulated the main idea of its constructors, the so-called LEGO system, where bricks from completely different sets fit perfectly together. Another 3 years later, in 1958, LEGO came up with the tube connection system for pieces, making them durable enough to last for decades. Since then, for almost 70 years, the LEGO design hasn't changed. That's why bricks from 58 easily fit with today's sets and are just as sturdy. All these improvements turned simply children's toys into a tool for creativity for millions of children worldwide. But no matter how well things were going for LEGO in the mid-20th century, all their greatness shattered against the harsh 90s. Just like the Soviets, LEGO experienced economic decline and questionable management decisions during this period. Throughout the 90s, LEGO sales fell as rapidly as Tesla stock after Musk's hand movements. When the company finally started investigating the reasons for the decline, the top managers, like in the well-known joke, end up pointing fingers at themselves. It turned out LEGO had become a victim of highly controversial decisions. The company invested huge amounts of money in theme parks, merchandise, and other ventures, forgetting about the main thing: its product. The company's foundation, the plastic bricks upon which the entire empire was built, literally started crumbling under the weight of new unprofitable projects. But it was easier for LEGO executives to ignore this, as their own income wasn't suffering. So the company continued to pour money into unclear ventures, often choosing objectively poor sets as main products. Take the Galidor set, released in 2002 for example. You couldn't hardly recognize classic LEGO in it. But the most absurd part was that the pieces from this set didn't fit with other sets, and producing them was economically unviable. One company executive later honestly admitted, "We literally saw profits falling, but continued to invest as if the company was growing at a frantic pace." These words are confirmed by LEGO's annual report for 2003, which states in black and white, "This year was disappointing for the company." Amidst this gloom, the company had only two bright spots that saved LEGO from complete collapse. The first was the LEGO Bionicle series. This series became so beloved by children that it remained the company's absolute sales leader for 4 consecutive years. If you dreamed of getting one of these sets as a child, definitely write in the comments which one you wanted most. The second lucky ticket for LEGO in those difficult years was in 1999. That year, the company released the first licensed Star Wars set. This collaboration eventually played a key role in the company's history, but more on that later. For now, let's do what perhaps half of humanity dreams of. Let's go back to early 2000s. Although things inside LEGO were going from bad to worse during this period, it's even more surprising that something unexpected happened outside the boardroom. Something that became a real lifesaver for the company. It turned out that it wasn't just kids who thought LEGO was cool. Those same kids who were fans of the constructors in the 80s and 90s had grown up but hadn't abandoned their hobby. Instead of spending money on bars, clubs and parties, many continued to buy their favorite childhood toy. There were so many of these people that they even got their own name, AFLs, adult fans of LEGO. These adult men and women managed to turn LEGO constructors into a real subculture. The only problem was that at that moment the company wasn't thinking about adults at all and made sets for ages 12 at most. Despite this, AFL spent huge amounts of money on LEGO and created true works of art from these simple sets. If you dig around online, you can find tons of video of these folks showing off their collections, many of which are now valued at tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. It seemed like the perfect way out of the crisis for the company, just make sets for adults. But as we remember, LEGO executives 20 years ago weren't the most forward-thinking people. One top manager later even admitted that adult fans initially just annoyed the management, and another said they didn't consider adult fans useful for the business at all. Nevertheless, the momentum the AFL movement had gained was impossible to stop. Their movement quickly grew from small fan internet forums into huge exhibitions and international conferences. By showcasing their impressive builds there, adult fans were doing the company an incredible favor, free advertising that the management probably didn't even realize. However, while the boost from the community was a plus for the company, it rather harmed ordinary buyers. Thanks to AFLs, a resale market suddenly began to form around LEGO. Those very resellers appeared who started actively profiting from it. The point is that LEGO regularly discontinues old sets. If you suddenly want to buy a specific model or even a single piece, a couple of years after its release, finding it in a store becomes impossible. Only one option remains, buying it second-hand. Because of this artificial scarcity, prices for many sets skyrocketed. Moreover, some people even began to view LEGO as a full-fledged investment like cryptocurrency or stocks, only safer. For example, just one Harley Quinn minifigure from the LEGO movie set now easily sells around $400, and prices for entire sets can reach $10,000, $15,000, and even more. And that's when LEGO finally realized that ignoring its adult fans was no longer possible and something needed to change urgently. First, LEGO drastically cut expenses on theme parks, merchandise and other business lines, returning to where they started, plastic bricks. Only now, the main focus was specifically on adult fans. In 2004, under new CEO leadership, LEGO decided to completely change its approach to doing business. Over the next few years, the company planned to actively develop mass collaboration with AFLs. The idea was simple: to make sets more profitable. They needed to be more diverse and complex for adult audience. This is where the fans themselves came to the rescue. The company's official annual report for 2006 directly stated that LEGO now drew inspiration for new constructors directly from fan sites and forums. Furthermore, LEGO began hiring the most talented builders directly from the fan community, thanks to which the technology used in new sets reached a completely new level. Here's a clear example of how in just 8 years LEGO went from sets for children to sets for adults. This is how the famous Millennium set looked in 1999. It cost $70 and contained 659 pieces. And here's the same Millennium Falcon from 2007. It cost $500 and consists over 5,000 pieces. As they say, think for yourself. Amazing. Of course, even despite the help of dedicated fans, LEGO wouldn't be the largest global brand today if not the active development of themed sets. The new management suddenly remembered the successful experience of 1999, when LEGO collaborated with Star Wars and decided to develop this further. Unprofitable owned series like the aforementioned LEGO Galidor were urgently discontinued and replaced with new releases that later became iconic. So by the end of 2000s, LEGO series included LEGO Harry Potter, LEGO Batman and LEGO Lord of the Rings, and a huge number of other collaborations appeared. This new direction proved particularly successful against the backdrop of the global boom in fandoms and the development of so-called kidult industry. when a product looks like a children's toy but is made specifically for adults. As a result, even people who had never been interested in Lego but loved, for example, Marvel, didn't spare money on sets with Iron Man and Captain America. Thanks to the new strategy, Lego managed to attract a huge new audience and reach a price level previously unimaginable if the company had continued to bet only on children. As a result, today, 20 years later, Lego earns almost 10 times more than before. But still, why did Lego ultimately become so expensive? Is it just because of adult fans? Actually, if you break it down, the price per individual piece in the sets has barely changed over the past 20 years. For example, let's take that same Millennium Falcon set. In 1999, each piece cost about 10 cents. In 2007, the same. 10 years later, 11 cents. Even accounting for inflation, the price has remained practically the same. So why did the total cost of constructors rise so sharply? It's simple, the sets became much more complex. Lego now releases huge sets with thousands of pieces aimed at an adult audience. And the larger and more complex the set, the more expensive it is to produce. High quality plastic, high-tech factories, strict quality control, all this costs money. Plus, the company annually spends hundreds of millions of dollars on research and new technologies. Another reason for high prices is licensing agreements with popular franchises like Marvel or Star Wars. Lego pays huge licensing fees for the right to create these sets, and of course brand and marketing. Also, Lego actively invests in advertising, collaborates with influencers, and creates sets that you don't just want to build but show off to friends and display on your shelves. All this combined has made Lego not just a toy, but a whole culture that people are willing to pay really big money for. Well, that's all. If you like this video, be sure to send it to a friend. And if you want to learn more about brands, marketing and advertising, be sure to subscribe. And of course, write in the comments whether you buy Lego sets today or consider it too expensive of a pleasure. Bye.